Those were the days.
Hey everyone, Justin Lee Howard here with another edition of Those Were Days Extended. And today, guys, we are going to take a bit of a deep dive into one of the most strange, bizarre, dramatic, story-inducing relationships on the show. This storyline in particular, or these two characters meeting, coming together, sort of defined for me the mid to late 90s all the way into the 2000s, and we're going to get into that storyline. And of course, I am talking about specifically Hope and Stefano, two characters that in the beginning didn't have a ton of I wouldn't say interaction, but a ton of sort of defined storyline to bring them together outside of familial ties, specifically Hope to Bo and then Bo to Roman, who again was Stefano's sort of arch nemesis to begin with, and then the John stuff came along. But and in a later video, maybe I'll do the John and Stefano saga. But yeah, for me, this was, I love sort of peak 90s Days of Our Lives. To me, that was sort of the threshold. And when I've been watching Days since I was a toddler, but that's when I sort of really got into really heavily into Days was those early 90s. But yes, we're going to talk about the Princess Gina storyline a little bit, because I feel like in other videos I've covered a lot of that, but there is a lot to decipher. There's a lot of twists and turns that storyline gave us, and then at the end I'm gonna talk about a portion of that storyline that is sort of forgotten a bit. Is not very referenced, but to me was a very, 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 very big missed opportunity to drive storyline further. And I'm curious. I don't think we've ever gotten an answer of why that storyline was dropped or changed or retconned. But I will get into that soon. But what kind of sent me down this little rabbit hole here, if you'll see in these photos here, was it started taking you back to October 28th. This is 2016. This is when Hope's confession to Stefano's murder was played publicly during a Halloween event. So yeah, it's sort of those were the days memory coming up sort of sent me down the rabbit hole of Hope and Stefano and their saga. Of course, the Princess Gina stuff. But actually, what I want to start with is it started even further than, if you guys remember or were watching that time. It sort of started, or at least it planted a little bit of the seeds here. This, of course, is Peter Reckel as Bo and Miranda Wilson as Megan Dimera. This is sort of when it started. If you don't know, Megan and Bo were high school sweethearts. She came back to town, wanted to win him over. It was sort of her dumping Bo, and the heartbreak that Bo had was sort of the first obstacle in the sort of Bo and Hope beginning part of their saga. Him sort of getting over his relationship in his first love with Megan Dimera and sort of being able to move on to Hope. It created a lot of jealousy. This was the first triangle we got, we'll say, kind of, I wouldn't say intense, but I think intense for them because they were just starting out, and Bo had these unresolved feelings about how his relationship ended with Megan and being able to really commit to Hope back then, a young Hope back then. But yeah, the Bo and Hope, this was the first outlier, was Megan Dimera. And again, of course, we saw Megan Dimera come back almost 30 years later, and she fueled storyline and was the main antagonist in Beyond Salem Part 2 or Chapter 2. We are fingers crossed she comes back to the main, and then eventually went on to the main show. We are fingers crossed she comes back. I think Miranda Wilson is such a huge talent, and I think the show could use someone like her in the role. I think she brought a old school sort of villainry to the show and her character, and so it's fingers crossed we see some Megan sometime soon. But this is sort of how it started. Again, this created the initial drama in the Bo and Hope relationship, them getting together early on. Also, when Megan was killed by Larry Welch, Larry pinned the murder on Hope, which of course sent Stefano into a tizzy because he thought that Hope had in fact murdered his daughter. It was later proven that she wasn't, of course, but this is sort of the planting of the seeds of the Stefano Hope stuff. This was their first sort of I want to say like antagonism between them, was the fact that Stefano thought, of course, Hope murdered his daughter. He was out for blood and revenge. The truth was revealed eventually, and he sort of backed off. But yeah, this is sort of the planting of the seed. But it, of course, took full form in a way that none of us even expected. If you're watching back then or remember, Christian Alfonso wanted to leave the show and pursue other things. She was on other soaps, and she did, if you remember, she did Melrose Place and played a villain on that, which totally sort of circumvented her time on Days as Hope. But when they decided to bring the character back in 1994, I think it was 94, 95, they needed a way to do that, and they needed a way to explain her absence. And that, of course, started to me is one of the probably greatest umbrella storyline that Days has ever done, in my opinion. It's a storyline that I'd be so curious to talk to the writers of them. We've gotten little snippets and interviews from them, and I've covered this in very other Those Were the Days. I've covered them in a couple of Those Were the Days extended specifically, but I love to pick their brain to see what it was that really fueled this whole here it is coming up, this whole Princess Gina Stefano saga that we got. That was, if you guys remember, it was years and years of storyline, and there were so many twists and turns and things to make it interesting. But going back to the beginning, how it started was with Ernesto Toscano, who was Isabella Toscano's stepfather. He had a rivalry with Victor Kiriakis, which made Bo a target for him early on. Which made Hope, by extension, a target for Ernesto. Ernesto was also kind of friendly, sort of, how should I say, not a thief, but a fellow criminal to Stefano. So they sort of had, Stefano and Ernesto sort of had their history and were kind of friends with each other. Honor among thieves kind of a thing. So if you remember, during the Cruise of Deception storyline, Ernesto was out for blood. He gathered all these people who he wanted revenge against: Bo, Hope, Victor, Jack and Jennifer, I believe at the time, Isabella. He ended up kidnapping Hope from them, suspending her over the cage of acid, which we all remember. Of course, this I think may have been the start of Days' fascination with keeping women in cages. We saw it subsequently done again with Marlena, and then with Sean Douglas, and then I think even with Nicole at one point. I think she was maybe even kept in a cage of some sort, but she was put in the cage, suspended over the acid. We saw her, or we thought we saw her descend and die. And that's what sort of kicked off Hope's death storyline, which lasted for about, I think it was all said and done into Christian Alfonso returned. I want to say it was about 4.5 years, maybe even close to 5, that she was gone. But we later found out that while Ernesto Toscano was the antagonist in that storyline and the one who actually took Hope, Stefano was the one who benefited from that kidnapping. We find out later that he had actually made a deal with Ernesto, and that's why he was able to, at the last minute, if you remember, beginning part of the Princess Gina storyline, Stefano actually swapped Hope with Greta, who was a somewhat lookalike to Hope because she was the daughter of Princess Gina. So therefore she and Princess Gina and Hope are sort of doppelgangers. And so that's why Greta would look similar to Hope, not exactly, but similar. He swapped her out for there, kidnapped Hope. His master plan was, as we all saw, was to have Hope impersonate the real Princess Gina, who was an art thief and into art and just this really interesting sort of socialite in European royalty, and was to impersonate her, along with taking John Black, who he had cemented as a young priest at the time, and side note, had put him in Aramid, and that's how we got sort of the early Kristen, Peter, Rachel storyline, was because Stefano implanted John as the pod in Aramid with as the local priest at the church. That is where Rachel, her two children, Kristen and Peter, come into fray. That is where Celeste went to give up Lexi. That is sort of the genesis of a lot of the beginning of this storyline, and how the Kristen, Peter, the Lexi stuff was all wrapped into the beginning part of this storyline. And of course, we know Celeste was revealed to be Lexi's mother. She is the right-hand man. She was right-hand woman, to Stefano. She was also the caretaker to the woman named Gina. Again, I'll do a brief thing of this just because it can get a little confusing. I feel like when I explain this to people, or people who don't remember, I have to pull down one of Tony's infamous charts with the red shoestring that connects all the dots, probably from a picture like this, to explain all the different facets. But yeah, he took Hope. He implanted the memories of Princess Gina so that she can impersonate Princess Gina. But when she wasn't impersonating Princess Gina, she was a woman named Gina who had a different personality from Hope, who did not have any of Hope's memories. And that is the woman who lived at Maison Blanche with Celeste. And I think covered a little bit of this in my 2 or 3 Those Were Days extended ago, when I did Hope and Celeste and their sort of interesting relationship. So go check that out if you haven't seen that. But when she wasn't impersonating Princess Gina, she was a woman named Gina, living her life being cared for by Celeste in Maison Blanche in New Orleans. So yeah, and while Stefano had her, he made her and John sort of team up as his team and steal art and replace them with forgeries. And that was how a lot of Stefano's, at least in the early 90s, his money was made, selling art forgery and making a profit off of that. What we later found out as the storyline is going, again, we had so many twists and turns. We had the Stefano, we had the Gina saga, which was when Hope came back. She was, again, the woman named Gina. She didn't have any of Hope's memories. She had a completely different personality. Also covered this in which I remark as the greatest, sort of most interesting triangle. I think Days It's Done. It's the Bo, Billy, Gina one. That's what's centered around that. That's what made her and Bo sort of kept them apart a little bit in the beginning. That's what made Gina become sort of best friends with Billy, and that's how it complicated that amazing, incredibly three-dimensional sort of triangle. And again, like I said, one of the best that ever did. There was also Greta coming back into the fold. We found her at Maison Blanche in New Orleans. Bo found her. He thought she was Hope. She got reconstructive surgery, care of John, who at one point she thought was her dad. She came into the fray, and it created this really, really sweet sort of quasi mother-daughter relationship with Hope, but also this father-daughter relationship with John, neither of which were her parents. And then the twist kept on coming, and then we got to this interesting twist. I desperately want to sort of pick the writers' brains about this and what kept them going and what gave them the decision to sort of keep to adding sort of these twists and turns to this. And one of the most interesting ones, and I think probably incredibly fun for Christian Alfonso to play, was when they actually brought the real Princess Gina into the fold. And let me get, there we go. So you have a better picture of it. So this is when it was revealed that the real Princess Gina, who Hope was kidnapped to impersonate all these years ago, the one who actually had a relationship with John while he was under Stefano's control during the pawn and supplemented all those years. He is the one who actually had the relationship with the real Princess Gina. And here is Christian Alfonso. And again, during that storyline, hats off to her. She played not only Hope, she played Gina as Hope. She played Hope as Princess Gina. And then the fourth character she played was the actual real Princess Gina, who actually is significantly older than Hope is. So that's why it explains, if you see here, Christian Alfonso is in the gray wig. This is her and her henchman. I believe his name was Glenn. It was revealed that, again, another twist of the storyline, that Stefano had in fact kidnapped the real Princess Gina, took her out of commission so that he can use Hope to supplement her and keep things going. She was been held captive in this castle for years. She makes her way out. She sort of finds a way to trap both Stefano and Hope in this castle that she was being held captive in. She goes back to Salem. She gets a little plastic surgery done to look a little bit younger so she can impersonate Hope. She goes there with the intention of actually winning back John, who she loves, and also establishing a relationship with her daughter Greta. What happens is interesting to us, which I actually really like that they did. As the real Gina is sort of impersonating Hope and going on with things, she actually sees that John is happy with Marlena and sees that their sort of relationship had sort of come and gone, and it was something of the past, and she sort of focuses her sights on Bo and actually falls in love with Bo and thinks, you know what, I can actually pull off this impersonation of Hope. I look like her, I sound like her, I'm in love with Bo, so this is sort of a match made in heaven. I also can have Greta as part of my life because Greta and Hope are so close, and so she can sort of keep up that charade and sort of at this point get everything that she wants. What she didn't count on was Sean Douglas sort of having the feelings and really start to doubt that she was Hope. So that was the thorn in her side, and that has how she was eventually killed by Sean Douglas when they went over the cliff, when Christian Alfonso as the real Princess Gina tried to kill him during her wedding to Bo. So again, that's how that sort of saga really sort of ended. Bo eventually went on the hunt for the real Hope, found her and Stefano, rescued them, and that's how that portion of it ended. Now, I want to sort of, at this point, get into a portion that, like I mentioned earlier, that a lot of people don't either remember or they forget, because there was a little bit of a retcon there, but to me, this was probably, I think, not a disappointment, but to me, a really, really, really big missed opportunity here. And this was, if you guys don't remember this, here we go, right here. This was these three. This is Stefano, this is Hope / Gina, we just went over, and this, of course, is John Black and how these three are connected. And if you guys don't remember, when there was a point where Stefano wanted to change Hope back into Princess Gina because he wanted her for a mission, and he wanted to also change John Black into the pawn and have them go on one sort of final mission for something that he needed. I forget what, but he did that. And what happened was Gina took over. She slept with both John Black and slept with Stefano, became pregnant. That baby is the baby we now know as Zach. This is when, so if you guys remember, that Bo was not the original father of Zach, that it was either going to be John Black or Stefano Dimera. And that was sort of the latest twist and plot line of a little bit of a resurgence of the storyline coming into play and making things complicated for all of these people involved. And which was so interesting back then. I thought, like, okay, this Princess Gina storyline is winding down a bit. I think we've explored all facets. We've had the real Gina sort of come and go. She's dead. Stefano is what we think sort of neutralized and exposed at this point. How are we going to keep this going? And this is how they did it, by sort of making Hope, having Hope become pregnant by these two men. One, Stefano, her at this point her arch enemy and nemesis, and sort of has, in a weird way, sort of even eclipsed Marlena as an obsession of his, in a weird way. Not a romantic obsession. I think that was always reserved for Marlena, but in terms of being like a puppet master, I think Hope was his, in a weird way, his greatest victim, if that makes sense. And then, of course, John, well, I guess Hope and John. So these two people, he found himself in this weird sort of paternity triangle with. And if you guys remember, it was so hyped up in such an interesting way to do things that Hope found herself impregnated by one, Stefano, her arch nemesis at this point, but also John, her friend, her, one of her best sort of couple friends with Marlena. What is this going to do to not only her marriage to Beau, and they've been through their trials and tribulations with Billy and Patrick Lockhart and all those things. What is it going to do to that relationship? What is it going to do to Marlena and John's relationship at this point? And so that was a big thing. And then, if you guys remember, I was trying to find the old promo. If anybody has seen it or has a link to it, please put it below, because I think it'd be great for everyone to check out. But Days actually did a Who's the Daddy promo back then, and it was very hyped up. It was very, is it going to be Stefano or John? My hope at the time was that it would be Stefano's, so that it would cement sort of Hope into the Dimera family with a Stefano Dimera child. I think it would fuel storyline in terms of them fighting, probably fighting over custody, them trying, Hope being the angel, trying to keep the child good, Stefano wanting to influence it as the devil. I thought that would be a really great storyline to kind of propel these two into a different chapter, now that the Princess Gina stuff was sort of winding down a bit. I didn't mind if it even was John's, because I think that sort of complicates these two couples and their relationships, and it creates a bit of tension that they've never sort of had with each other or faced with each other. Even though I think the greater potential for storyline would have been if it was Stefano's child. Not only did they do the promo, they also, of course, did. So Barbara Digest, I found this old cover where it said fans to choose the father of Hope's, and you'll see this, it's sort of covered here, but it says Hope's baby. And yes, this was, in addition to the promo, it was a contest basically to pick either John as the father or Stefano as the father. And I thought, oh, this is going to be so interesting. Fingers crossed, Stefano sort of comes out on top. Like I said, I think he had the most potential for interesting storyline moving this forward. But then something happened. You guys know of it. We sort of kind of laugh about it or make fun of it. They decided to do a retcon, and they decided to make this baby, who would eventually be Zach, they decided to make him Beau's child. And this goes into another issue, which I'll talk about in a second. But I just remember being incredibly disappointed. They had come up with this really sort of kind of odd and strange retcon that, while Hope was turned into Princess Gina during that brief period, she went to Paris, and Beau had inexplicably been captured or kidnapped and some supplemented by Stefano to be a mime in Paris for some sort of reason. I don't even remember anymore. The whole thing, honestly and truly, was incredibly comical and eye-rolling. And so while Princess Gina was there, she encounters this mime, this Beau who is not in his right mind, who is being controlled as a mime. They get together and have sex, and that is how Beau is now the father of Zach, in which us fans appropriately titled it mime sex. So if you look up or see people refer to mime sex, that is what they're referring to. That is the retcon that allowed Beau to be Zach's father, completely, in my opinion, kicking out this storyline that was far more interesting of either John or Stefano being who we now know as Zach's dad, and how that would have played out. I think it would have, of course, changed the trajectory. I think it it just would have made things a lot more interesting with what we know, how that storyline played out with Zach. Maybe he wouldn't have died. Maybe they would have kept it going because the potential for the stuff between Stefano and Hope would have driven even more storyline into the future. But also brings up this interesting sort of debate some of us have had over the years about how the character of Hope has been treated, and in regard to her sort of super coupledom with Bo, that Bo has been allowed to have significant relationships outside of Hope, and even allowed to have a child in the form of Chelsea, and how Hope hasn't been able to have that outside of, she sort of started to have it with one of my favorites, and someone who I personally would have preferred Hope with, and that's Patrick Lockhart. And if you remember, if you go watch my Those Were Days Extended with Hope and Patrick, that if Sierra was supposed to be Patrick's child, that was changed. Sierra is now Bo's child. This one was changed so that Zach is now Bo's child. So really, originally, Bo and Hope were only supposed to be the parents of Sean Douglas. And then they've had these times where there's been an attempt to give Hope a significant relationship outside of Bo. Again, the stuff with Aiden was probably a little bit more significant than the stuff with Patrick, I recognize. And then they completely trashed that character. I did another video on that. You can go check that out. Unfortunately, rest in peace, to Aiden. He's not dead, but, rest in peace to the character of Aiden and how they did him. But yeah, it just goes to kind of see, I don't want to use the word sexism. I don't want to kind of put it on things, but it's very interesting how they chose to, what they allowed the character of Bo to do during his tenure, and while Hope was away. And then when Hope had the opportunity, when Bo wasn't on canvas, how did they treat her? How did they treat her as a viable love interest to these other men, whether it was Patrick Lockhart, whether it was Aiden? They sort of, we see they copped out in terms of giving her another child, which I thought would have made an even interesting dynamic in their relationship, because Chelsea was such a big part of someone coming in and sort of messing with not only their marriage, their family. She's responsible for Zach's death. So yeah, I think it would have been interesting if we got a Hope Stefano child, or I understand even if it was John's baby, I think that would have it would have put a strain maybe on the Hope Bo relationship, but moving forward, I don't think it would have had as much of an effect as if the baby was Stefano's. So again, just for me, a big missed opportunity in the saga. I wish they had really followed through on it. Again, I'm curious if anyone knows, or if anyone has a link to or any information, please put it down in the chat as to if the writers gave a reason why they changed it, or the powers that be, or what was going on at the time. It's always nice to sort of look up those things and share it with everyone in the chat. So yeah, comment below about the saga. Were you as enthralled in the Princess Gina saga? Did you also remember the Who's the Daddy promos regarding Hope's baby? And if you remember, who did you want to be the father? And let me know why. But yeah, this was sort of a deep dive on Hope and Stefano. It ended with her killing him, and then, her trying to bring it back as Stefano in that relationship, and then bringing Princess Gina back for a short period of time again, which in my opinion didn't really work. But I think it was a good decision to have Hope be the one to kill him. I think over the years, again, especially in the beginning, Roman was such a big part of Stefano's journey that sort of fell off. John became the central figure for a lot of it, and then of course, I think Hope in a weird way, I think, eclipsed both of them in terms of, like I said, being an object of Stefano's sort of just really torment over the years. So yeah, let me know what you thought of this relationship and what we saw on screen, what you wished may have happened differently. But yeah, let me know. Take care, everyone. Thanks. See you on the next one.
Those were the days.